أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. أم حسبتم أن تدخلوا الجنة ولما يعلم الله الذين جاهدوا منكم ويعلم الصابرين. صدق الله العلي العظيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين، سيما بقية الله في الأرضين. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. Brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I pray that you're all well, that the month of Ramadan is treating you finely, inshallah. First and foremostly, if I can see a show of hands, if you guys can hear me. Brilliant. Fantastic. So it's the nights of Qadr now, and so we're going to have a bit of a mention about that. But before we do that, I want to give a little bit more of the story of Prophet Musa alayhi salam. So we're going to keep it a short session, and then we're going to open up for Q&A and any other comments that you guys want to pass, inshallah. Um, in the story, if you remember, just as a very quick recap, Prophet Musa, he was in Egypt and then he was exiled from Egypt due to those actions of those uh, silly Shia who were claiming to follow him. And then we saw that he joined Shu'aib in Madian. He got married because of that beautiful dua that he made. So now we're at that part of the story, which for me is the most beautiful part. And that is when Musa alayhi salam, he sees a fire. And we discussed in the previous session how that fire actually represents something quite normal, at least in Musa's view. He was going there to look after his family. But when he gets close to the fire, what happens? So now, if you guys would like to turn to Surah Taha, that's Surah 20, verse 11. Surah Taha, that's Surah 20, verse 11. And it says, and when he came to it, he was called, O Moses. فَلَمَّا أَتَاهَا نُودِيَ يَا مُوسَى. Subhanallah. Imagine hearing the voice of God and he's telling you your own name. Indeed, I am your Lord, so remove your sandals. Indeed, you are in the sacred valley of Tuwa. Inni ana rabbuka fakhla'na alayk. Innaka bilwadi al-muqaddasi tuwa. Immediately, the first thing that he is commanded to do is to remove his sandals. So every prophet, every great prophet like the Prophet Musa alayhi salam, he was given certain commandments. Those commandments is what we refer to as the Sharia. And previous generations had a different Sharia, and that Sharia is always changing and updating as time goes on. And so there was a different Sharia for the Muslims who came before the Holy Prophet. This is a big misconception that people have in their minds that the followers of Musa were Jews or that the followers of Isa alayhi salam, those who we refer to as Christians, were Christian. No, in reality, they were all Muslims. They were all those who submit to the will of Allah. Okay, we have actually labeled them as Jews or as Christians or previous generations as Sabians, for example. In reality, the followers of the prophets, they have always been mu'mineen, believers. They have always been Muslims. Even Prophet Ibrahim is described as somebody who was following the upright religion. It may not have had the title of Islam, maybe, But at the same time, it wasn't Judaism, it wasn't Christianity. But look here in this verse. This is the first commandment that Prophet Musa is told. When you are in a sacred place, remove your sandals. And of course, there is a whole wisdom behind this, how it's a sign of respect, a sign of humbleness to remove your sandals in that holy place. And this is something that you can see even in the biblical texts. And so it begs the question, why is it that when you enter into a church or a synagogue, for example, you don't remove your sandals? And that's a question that those who we refer to as Christians and Jews need to ask. The next verse, and this is perhaps that verse where you can, if you are visualizing the Holy Quran, you might actually envision Musa alayhi salam at this point moving from being in absolute awe to actually breaking down in tears. What? Because Allah has already told him, I am your Lord. What's the next thing that he tells him? So Allah, he knows that this voice that is speaking to me, this is the voice of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Very quick point here. Allah doesn't have a physical voice, so to speak. And so when Allah speaks to us, he speaks to us through a means. Um, but we can discuss that going further on. But it's important for us to recognize that Allah does not have a voice of his own, because that would give off the impression that Allah has vocal cords. How are you supposed to speak without vocal cords? If you have vocal cords, that means you have a physical throat. If you have a physical throat, that means you have a physical body. And that, my dear brothers and sisters, is a huge act of shirk, actually. This is believing that Allah has actually a limitation, because at the end of the day, if somebody is physical, they are limited by time, by space. Somebody came to Imam Ali alayhi salam and they asked him about this issue. And he said, look, if you ask on what is Allah, then that is assuming that he is not somewhere else. If you ask where is Allah, the appropriate response to that should be, as Imam Ali alayhi salam taught us to say, where is Allah not? So the next verse that Allah tells Prophet Musa is what? He says, I have chosen you. So listen to what is revealed to you. وَأَنَا اخْتَرْتُكَ فَاسْتَمِعْ لِمَا يُوحَى. Indeed, I am Allah. He's reaffirming now. He's told him, I'm your Lord. Now he's telling him, I am Allah. There is no deity, no God except me. So worship me and establish prayer for my remembrance. إنني أنا الله لا إله إلا أنا فاعبدني وأقم الصلاة للذكر. The fundamental message that was given to all the prophets, whichever prophet and whichever time he came in and whichever nation he was sent to, every prophet that has ever come to humanity taught this very basic thing, that there is only one God, and that it is that God who we should render our servitude and our conformity to. Nobody and no other gods deserve that conformity and that servitude. And this is what Allah now is reminding Musa of. In verse 15, he says, indeed, the hour is coming. I almost conceal it, so that every soul may be recompensed according to what it has striven for. إن الساعة آتية أكاد أخفيها لتجزى كل نفس بما تسعى. Now, again, you have to ask yourself about this particular verse. The hour is coming. Musa alayhi salam, how long ago was he? Maybe 1,500 years, maybe 2,000 years? No, of course not. It's far more than that, because 2,000 years ago was when Isa alayhi salam came. Musa must have been 3,000 years ago. Let's say it was 3,000 years ago. Some might argue it was even longer. But let's say it was 3,000 years ago. For 3,000 years, Allah has been telling his prophets and his messengers to tell the people that the hour is close, the day of judgment is close. I mean, subhanallah. And there's just one point that I want to give in this regard, and that is that we won't understand how close the day of judgment is if we look at it through our own lens, the lens of our own lives. After all, we only live for like 70 years, maybe 100 years, if we're really lucky and we, I don't know, put ourselves on a Far Eastern diet. Maybe we'll live for 120 years, but after that, we're going to die. And so for us, we're almost like children, and it doesn't seem that close. You have to kind of zoom out and look at the history of the entire human race in order to understand this point. Humanity has been around for a bloomin' long time, far, far longer than some of the traditionalist scholars among the Christians, the Jews, and even some of the Muslims will argue. If anybody tells you that Adam, Prophet Adam, was only 6,000 years ago, you really have to look at the history of humanity and think to yourself, hold on a second, this doesn't make sense at all. Humanity has been around for many, many millennia. And what we're now approaching is the final imam of that final era. And there's a lot that's going to happen after the Dhuhr as well. And that's something that we often don't talk about. The Raj'ah, which Sayyid Abdullah has been touching on, the idea that all of the great people, whether they are on the side of evil or the side of good, they will also return. All of these things are going to happen, but they're going to happen very, very quickly, in quick succession. And the day of judgment is dawning upon us faster than we can imagine. But there's another point that it may be concealed behind this. You see, when Allah is speaking about as-sa'ah, the hour, whenever these verses prop up about the day of judgment, we also have to understand that there are layers of meanings behind such verses. And often what you see in the Ahlul Bayt alayhimussalam's words, especially when you go to the tafsir for such verses, is you'll see that they are saying this is referring to the dhuhur of Imam Mahdi alayhi salam. I'm bringing this up now because this is something that we can see and feel as far more eminent. And it's easier for us to understand this because the dhuhur of Imam Mahdi alayhi salam, the qiyam, the uprising of Imam Mahdi alayhi salam, is almost like a mini qiyamah. It's the qiyamah before the qiyamah. It's the judgment before the judgment. It's almost like if you think about the day of judgment as the dawn, right? The sun rising. Imam Zaman is like Fajr before the dawn. So Fajr prayers, if you notice, when you wake up for Fajr prayers, it's still dark outside. But the way that you determine whether it is actually Fajr or not is that if you look in the direction of the sunrise, then you're going to see a thin slither of light. It's almost like a beam of light shooting up into the sky. And this is known in fiqh as the Fajr Kadhib, the false Fajr, right? Uh, the idea is that you have to wait for that light to kind of come out and then spread out, right? But again, the premise still stands that before the dawn takes place, before the sun actually rises, there is a sign, and that sign is this one beam of light coming out of the horizon. That's how, by the way, in the olden days, you didn't have, phones and alarm clocks and prayer times scheduled neatly in your phones or your devices. People would actually have to stand on their rooftops or go out into the desert or the mountains and actually look at the horizon. Ah, man, it's just a simpler time. And there is something really beautiful about that, actually looking at the sky and saying, oh, Allah, when are you going to make Fajr come? Imam Zaman alayhi salam and the dhuhur is similar to that in the sense that his dhuhur is something that has to take place before the day of judgment, almost as certain as the Fajr before the dawn. Okay. And so when you see certain verses saying that the hour is close, it's not just referring to the day of judgment, but it's referring to that which leads to the day of judgment also. And remember the hadith of the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He said that even if there's only a day left until the day of judgment, even if there's only a day left until Qiyamah, we will extend that day. Allah will extend that day to encompass the rulership of a man from my progeny, i.e., Al Mahdi alayhi salam. And I think there's something deeper for us to extrapolate from that, which is glaringly relevant for all of us. Sometimes, especially in the years that lie ahead of us, dear brothers and sisters, times are going to get very, very confusing. There's all sorts of things which the enemies have been cooking for years, and those plans are going to be implemented very, very soon. Uh, at times, you might feel like Qiyamah is happening. And so these words of the Prophet will give you some level of comfort so that you know that even if you feel like that's it, everything is being destroyed now, Qiyamah is actually happening. Don't worry. Allah is going to extend this dreadful, dreadful day to encompass the light and the beauty of Imam al-Hujjat al-Qa'im al-Mahdi alayhi salam. And so even in the darkest of times, hold on to that hope. It's the only thing that we really have. Um, so let's go to verse 16. Then Allah says, so do not let one avert you from it, the idea of it, who does not believe in it and follows his desires, for you then would perish. Remember, dear brothers and sisters, this is not just a message for Prophet Musa. This is not just a story that we're reading about him. This is a message for you and I. Allah says, فَلَا يَصُدَّنَّكَ عَنْهَا مَنْ لَا يُؤْمِنُ بِهَا وَاتَّبَعَ هَوَاهُ فَتَرْضَى. Do not listen to those people, dear brothers and sisters. You are, as you go further, going to give ear to certain scholars, to certain friends, to certain spheres of influences, and they might actually tell you the time is far. Don't worry. Oh, we'll worry about it when it comes. And they will push this idea that the dhuhur is delayed and delayed and delayed. It's far away. They will put it in front of your eyes as though it's far away. There's actually a hadith in this regard about recognizing the true believers, your true friends. And in that hadith, um, the Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam teach us that your true friend is the one who's honest with you, who tells you the truth, whereas your enemy, sorry, is the one who makes that which is very far seem near and that which is very near seem far. And also, there's a verse in the Quran, which Surah Ahad, you know, the beautiful dua that you can recite every morning. And whoever recites this dua every morning for 40 consecutive mornings, even if he dies before the war takes place, he will be raised in the army of the Mahdi alayhi salam. In this dua, the Ahlul Bayt leave us with one of the profound verses of the Quran. What does that verse say? إنهم يرونه بعيدا ونراه قريبا. Surely they see it as very far, whereas we see it as close. This is the attitude that the believers are supposed to have when it comes to not only Qiyamah, but the zuhur of Imam Mahdi, the reappearance of Imam Mahdi alayhi salam. Do not think of it as very far. It's not far. It is very close. Now, you might think to yourself, well, if believers have always existed and they've always thought that it's close and they've lived and they've died, what makes us any different? Well, one of the differences may be this, and this is just for your consideration. Those people who came before us, maybe they didn't believe that it is close. Maybe that level of knowledge and iman that was required of them in order for zuhur to take place didn't come together in their hearts. I want you to reflect now about all the people in your life, the society, the politics, the governments, the social media, everybody who's talking. Look at how the narratives are actually changing, how many non-Muslims are coming towards the path of Islam. Or if not even Islam, they're actually understanding how unjust the tyrannical powers are. Everybody is desperately crying out for some sort of revolutionary change in the world. All of these are signs for us that people, humanity, is more ready now than ever before. And you can bet that tomorrow they are going to be more ready than they are today. And so we have to understand that Allah is dragging all of us as a human race towards a state of preparedness for that fateful act. Now, despite that, you're going to have people in your vicinity, people who even maybe in your families, people in your tribes, people in your communities, and of course, scholars who will actually avert you from this. They will put it into your mind that don't worry, the Lord is very, very far away. Be cautious, beware of such people. Okay. Allah is telling Musa alayhi salam in his first audience with him, don't listen to those people. They will avert you from the right path. They will make you think that it's very far when actually it's very close. There have been different zuhurs and different cataclysmic events throughout human history. So when Allah is telling him the hour is close, in Musa's time, there was also an event which could be seen as similar to the event that we are about to witness with Imam Zaman. And so that event could be what was alluded to in the time of Musa. One of the beautiful things about the Quran is it's always fresh, it's always new in every age up until the day of judgment, people will be reading, researching, studying this Quran, and it will never cease to be relevant. In fact, its relevancy is only going to increase. So don't think to yourself that, oh, all of this is relevant to us now, but after the Lord happens, the future generations are going to read these verses and it's just going to be a historical point. No, because there is going to be another change, another qiyamah, another mini qiyamah before the great qiyamah that they have to look forward to. And therefore, the Quran is always going to be speaking to them. And it's going to be up to those generations whether they choose to listen or not. What did Allah say in the previous verse? Listen to what is being revealed to you. So now let's go to verse 17. And what is that in your right hand, O Musa? Huh? The conversation has completely changed now. Allah is saying to Musa, وَمَا تِلْكَ بِ وَمَا تِلْكَ بِيَمِينِكَ يَا مُوسَى. What's in your right hand? That's suddenly changed the tone. First, Allah's talking about all these great things, the great events are going to take place. Don't listen to the disbelievers. By the way, what's in that? What's in your hand? What are you holding? What does Musa say? He said, This? This is my staff. I lean on it and I bring down the leaves for my sheep. If you imagine, they would go through the wilderness, and so he would use that staff of his to move aside branches and loose shrubs so that the sheep could actually pass through. And I have therein other uses. I've got lots of uses for it. That's what's in my hand. قال هي عصاي أتوكأ عليها وأهش بها على غنمي ولي فيها مآرب أخرى. That is such a weird response. Let's be honest with ourselves. Why would Musa say that? In a hadith, somebody actually asked Musa, Oh, Musa, why didn't you just say this? It's my staff. You're speaking to God. He knows what's in your hand. He's only asking you for your own sake. So why didn't you just keep it simple and say, Oh, Allah, this is my staff? Musa gives a beautiful response. He says, It was my first time speaking with my Lord. And because I was so enamored by it, I wanted to take full opportunity to speak as much as I can about this simple question. Subhanallah. And this is a message for me and you. Dear brothers and sisters, when we are given the opportunity to converse with our Lord, it should be such a conversation that we want to extend it. We want to prolong it. When we are in salah, this is something that we do. We want to rush through it. Look at Musa. He's not even asked something quote unquote profound. He's asked something very, very basic. What's in your hand? What are you holding? He could have just said, it's my staff. No, he wants to prolong that conversation as much as possible. This is my staff. I lean on it. I help my sheep with it. I herd them with it, and I have other uses for it. Allah then tells him, throw it down, O Moses. Moses. قال ألقها يا موسى. This stuff was very important for him, okay, because he's actually telling Allah that this is something that I use for my daily chores, for my job. It's part of my profession. Remember in the previous session, we talked about how there's a skill that you need to gain, there's a proficiency that you need to adopt. Well, this is the first time in the Quran that you're actually seeing Musa alayhi salam holding a staff because now he's learned the art of herding sheep, which back then we looked down upon it. But there's a lot of work that actually goes into it. Now Allah is telling him that thing which you have spent 8 to 10 years gaining, throw it down. Musa immediately throws it down. So he threw it down, and thereupon it was a snake moving swiftly. فألقاها فإذا هي حية تسعى. That fruit of his efforts has just been transformed into a snake. What does Musa do? Allah tells him in the next verse, seize it and don't be afraid of it. We will return it to its former condition. قال خذها ولا تخف سنعيدها سيرتها الأولى. Fear not. Number one, Musa gets afraid. He gets afraid. This is a normal reaction for any human being. Even if you're speaking with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and something like that happens, you don't know what you're supposed to do in that situation. You don't know if that snake is poisonous. You don't know if it's a friend or a foe. You should get scared. Okay. And that's another thing that we should understand that when we get familiar with Allah, and this is something that Imam Khomeini talks about in Adab al-Salat, what happens is you begin this mystical journey. If we're performing the salah properly, people will start to see certain visions, for example. They will see the manifestations of their good deeds. And Imam Khomeini says that when these things first start to occur for you, it's very normal for you to get afraid of it. And it's not just being afraid of what you're seeing. Musa alayhi salam is seeing his staff turn into a snake here. That's terrifying, right? When you are in salah, inshallah, if Allah takes us to that spiritual state, which is not impossible, anybody who tells you otherwise doesn't know anything, right? It's not impossible. It is within your grasp. You have the ability. The only thing that's holding you back is your disbelief. Disbelief not only in Allah, not just that, but disbelief in your own God-given abilities, right? When that happens, you will not only be afraid of what you're seeing, you will become afraid of yourself. You'll become afraid of your own potential. How often has that happened, dear brothers and sisters? You feel this great potential within you. You know that Allah has bestowed you with immense spiritual potential. It frightens you. Allah here is saying, do not be afraid. La takhaf, and seize it. Right? He's saying, سَنُعِيدُهَا سِيرَتَهَا الْأُولَى. He will return it to its former condition. Right now you're having that vision. Right now you're going through that. Don't worry. This is for you. We will return it to its former condition. You're not going to lose your mind. You're not going to become unfunctionable in society. Don't worry. You're still going to have that thing that you have, spent your entire life building up. And then he says, and draw your hand to your side. So it literally says janahika. So they used to wear these kinds of almost like what you see scholars wearing today. But I imagine that it must have been a very different form. But the point is, we have pockets here, right? You usually don't see scholars reaching into their side pockets by their waists. They go to their chest. Okay, so Musa is told to put your hand there. He puts his hand there, and then when he sees it come out, it comes out white without disease. Or it's another sign. Okay, so when you read this translation, it might seem very strange to you. Okay, so there's two different interpretations of this. The first interpretation is that it literally came out white. I think Musa alayhi salam, this would make more sense if Musa alayhi salam had a darker complexion. Because if you just try to visualize that for a moment, a person with a dark complexion, or even if they have a fair complexion, but when their hand comes out and it is pure white, like white as paper, white as snow, that is a very strange thing to see. It's very odd. Okay. So even if the first interpretation is true, that, it just turned completely white without any blemish, even that is very strange. And I've watched a lot of shows with magicians because that's a common theme. When we go forward, you're going to see that the magicians are a common theme. I have never seen somebody do something like that. And that would be a very striking uh, image to actually see. Somebody put their hand into their pocket, it comes out white. The other interpretation is that it was actually coming out glowing with a bright light, a nur, which would illuminate the darkness of the cave, if you can imagine it. This nur is something which the hand of Musa was gifted with when he would put it to his jabe. But if you go to the hadith, the face, the whole body of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was at times enlightened with so much light that there are certain hadith that they would say in the darkest of nights, we would actually use the nur, the light of Muhammad al-Mustafa sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, in order to see our way and in order to navigate. A bright light. And I did some research into this. It's really fascinating, actually, because if you go to the deep oceans, you'll notice that there are certain animals which actually emit light. And that's just amazing in and of itself when you see animals in deep ocean actually emitting light. It's called bioluminescence. And did you know? Oh, God, did you know? And please correct me if I'm wrong. And please do share it with me if you find something interesting in this regard. Human beings are actually bioluminescent. Did you know that? I mean, how fascinating is that? We actually emit a light, but it's so little that we don't notice it and it doesn't actually impact our surroundings enough. And so you have to understand that there's a scientific rationality behind everything that Islam says. And so, for example, when the ahadith tell you that pray Salatul Layl, one of the advantages that you'll get is that your face will become full of nur, light. This could be what it's referring to. And the future generations, inshallah, in the time of Imam Mahdi alayhi salam, when Allah increases their scientific and technological advancement to such a great extent, they'll be actually able to break down why staying awake in the late hours of the night or waking yourself up right before Fajr time actually increases your bioluminescence. Subhanallah. There's a scientific reason behind everything that Islam has told us to do. The trick, dear brothers and sisters, is to do it and to submit to Allah before the scientific reason becomes clarified for you. There's so much in Islam, so much emphasis about intermittent fasting, right? Not just in the month of Ramadan, but throughout the year. Certain days you're supposed to fast. I don't do it. We should do it though, and I definitely should do it. But my point is this, that I recently saw a video. Actually, it wasn't recently, it was a couple of years back. And that video showed a bodybuilder who was also a dietitianary scientist, and he had this whole theory about how intermittent fasting will actually increase your physique. And so he went through a process of vigorous intermittent fasting, and he blooming heck, like he blew up, like his body was just so strong that he actually won um, awards and championships in weightlifting. So you ask yourself, why did Imam Ali alayhi salam possess so much strength? Yes, of course, it was a spiritual strength which comes from a different place. But there are things in Islam which actually have worldly benefits as well. But that video, when I saw it, it completely ruined intermittent fasting for me because thereafter, now every time I want to do fasting, I'm just in my head, I'm like, oh my God, am I really doing this for the sake of Allah? Or am I just doing it because I scientifically now know that it's actually beneficial for your body, you know? And so you'll be conflicted in that sense now, which just defeats the purpose. No, we're supposed to do things sincerely for the sake of Allah. Those benefits are just plus points. They're supposed to be, perks of being a Muslim. ربما يود الذين كفروا لو كانوا مسلمين. The Quran says, if I recited it properly, it says, many a times will non-Muslims wish that they had been Muslims. Okay, so we'll go to the next verse now. Allah says, so he's given him the staff. He shows him that it can transform into a snake by the permission of Allah. And then he gives him his hand. And he shows him that it will glow or turn white with the permission of Allah. And then he tells him in verse 23, um, these are signs that we may show you some of our greater signs. Okay. Now, there is a message in this that I want to share with you, inshallah, before we go to the Q&A session, and you guys can share your lovely thoughts as well. And that is this. Allah is telling you through these verses something which is significant to you. The next part of the verse is Allah tells him all of these things and then he sends him on his mission. What is his mission? To fight against the Pharaoh, to free the people from their captivity, and to bring about a generation of greater hope and tawheed, inshallah. When it comes to confronting the Taghut of his time, Pharaoh, the prelude to that is Allah tells him, I'm giving you these two things. Number one, your staff, and number two, your hand, which is going to glow. And so, one of the extrapolations that I would like to share with you today, dear brothers and sisters, is this. You all, similar to Musa alayhi salam and similar to all the prophets and imams, have a mission. That mission is to stand against the Pharaoh of your time. In this uprising against the Pharaoh of your time, you have to understand that Allah has also given you two things. One is represented through the staff. What is that? Well, think about what the staff represents. It is your skillty. It is your skill, your profession, that thing which you have spent hours and years of your life, perhaps 8 to 10 years precisely, building up, learning your knowledge, whether, for example, it's in the field of media or the field of medicine or the field of teaching, whatever that skill is, that is your staff. And the other thing is your hand, right? And what does that represent? It's something that you inherently already have. You just need Allah to unlock it for you. And I want to say that Allah has given you your raw talent, your iman, your fitrah, that thing which you were actually born with, your uniqueness. You have the ability to serve the cause of Allah in ways that nobody else has the ability to do. Dare I say it? So many people are like, oh, I wish I was like Imam Ali alayhi salam. I wish I could be like Imam Zaman alayhi salam. That's great. Imam Zaman alayhi salam, in one sense, cannot do what you can do because only you can be you. Oh God, that sounds so cliche when I say it, but I hope it's not coming across in that sense. You see, if you think about yourself in your circumstance, in your position, in the way that you were born, in the society that you are surrounded by, there is a task that you need to do for the sake of Allah as well. Okay, Imam Zaman alayhi salam cannot do that particular thing that you were born to do. And so the expectation is on your shoulder. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, out of His infinite mercy, has given you your staff and given you your hand. And it is down to you to recognize what these two things are personally for you and to understand how to use those things against the Pharaoh of your time and in order to serve the community of your time and age. With that said, inshallah, we're now going to go to the Q&A session. And if you guys have your own extrapolations, please do feel absolutely comfortable to share it. No answer is a wrong answer as long as it's coming from the right place, and I'm sure it is. With a loud and boisterous salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. اللهم صل على محمد